Good morning, everybody. And Dan, if I may start now.
Please go ahead.
Okay, wonderful. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of the participants. Thank you for joining us this morning or whatever time it may be where you are. My name is Yvonne Ewang. I am one of the legal officers within the Secretariat of the BRS Conventions, and I'm here with my colleague Juliette Kohler to give you a briefing on the outcomes of the 15th meeting of the Basel Convention Implementation and Compliance Committee and of the first ever meeting of the Rotterdam Convention Compliance Committee. So Juliette will give you a presentation on the Basel Convention Committee, and then I will address the outcomes of the Rotterdam Convention Committee meeting, and you will have an opportunity after the presentations to ask any questions that may have arisen during the presentations. Please be assured that all of those who enrolled, registered for the webinar, as well as those who are with us this morning, will receive a copy of the presentation afterwards as well. So you will certainly have all of this information in your emails probably later on this afternoon. So without further ado, Juliette, I pass over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yvonne, for this introduction, and I'll be taking it from here. I will need, please, the possibility to switch the slides. Yes, great, thanks a lot. So the 15th meeting of the Implementation Committee of the Basel Convention took place in Geneva in November from the 14th to 17th. And included 3.5 days of Basel Convention specific sessions and half a day of a joint session on issues of common interest with the Rotterdam Convention Compliance Committee. 15 members participate in the meeting, including 2 online. And we also had representatives of 6 parties concerned by a specific submission. In addition, 8 observers attended the meeting. Just a reminder of who the officers of the committee are. We have a 5-member bureau with a chair, Mr. Flores Pindo Furtado. The vice chairs are Mr. Hamed Alinejad, Ms. Odessa Duncan, and Mr. Flavius Motok. The rapporteur is Ms. Belkis Ismail. On the agenda of this meeting was the full work program of the committee. However, the committee considered only part of its work program due to the short intersessional period between the COPs, which is just 1 year. So it focused on 8 specific submissions regarding party implementation and compliance, and it reviewed prioritized general issues of implementation and compliance. And finally, it prepared a draft of its work program for 2024-2025, which will be considered by COP16 at the beginning of May, 1 to 12 May 2023 in Geneva. Now a brief information on the outcomes of the work of the committee on the specific submissions mandate. As I mentioned, the committee focused on 8 submissions, but these are 8 of 14 submissions currently under consideration by the committee due to difficulties faced by parties with national reporting and the development of legislation implementing the Basel Convention. And as is customary, the committee concluded its deliberations with the adoption of 8 decisions. Just a snapshot of those decisions are before you. Regarding Liberia, the committee concluded that the matter of concern has been resolved. With regards to Central African Republic and Togo, the committee reviewed the progress that is being made with the implementation of compliance action plans, which are aimed at the development of legislation implementing the Basel Convention. With regards to Mauritania, Cook Islands, and Syrian Arab Republic, the committee invited those parties to consider putting forward a compliance action plan to restore compliance with the national reporting obligations. And finally, Gabon and Nauru were not represented at the meeting, and the committee invited those two parties to resume its communication with the committee, so the committee may assist them resolve their compliance difficulties. Turning to the general issues of implementation and compliance, there are several thematic areas here, and I'll just again go briefly through the outcomes of the elements of the work program that were prioritized for consideration during this meeting. First of all, the draft classifications of compliance performance with national reporting for 2018 and 2019. This is an exercise that the committee has been doing for a number of years now, so there's a general indication of trends as to whether parties are doing better regarding timely and complete transmission of reports. And this exercise is undertaken on the basis of targets that are set by the Conference of the Parties. There are 3 targets: a target regarding the fact that a report has been transmitted, that's a 70% target. Then there's a target for complete reports, whether they were submitted on time or late. This is a 50% target. And finally, la crème de la crème is to have a report transmitted complete and on time. And for this, the Conference of the Parties set a 25% target. And you have here on the slide the initial conclusions of the committee regarding how progress has been done by parties vis-à-vis those 3 targets. And you may see that one of the targets, so the targets of complete and timely reports, was met for 2019. As this is a preliminary data, the Secretariat was requested to share this outcome to all the parties with an invitation to comment. This means that parties that have not transmitted a report may wish to do so, and those who have transmitted an incomplete report may wish to complement it with additional information, clarifications, or data, so that there is a better compliance report that can be then transmitted to the COP. So this would take place after the COPs and subject to COP16, including this activity in the new work program of the committee. Turning to the next activity under national reporting, and here again, the whole purpose of the exercise is to help parties improve transmission of timely and complete reports under the convention. And this activity is about integrating the needs of parties with respect to the transmission of national reports into their United Nations Sustainable Development Cooperation frameworks. So it's about really integrating at the national level in the broader framework of development the priorities of implementation of the convention. This is an issue that was joint to Rotterdam Convention Compliance Committee as decided by the respective conferences of the parties. Of course, for Basel, it's national reporting, and my colleague Yvonne will elaborate on the type of obligation concerned under the Rotterdam Convention. What the committee did was to finalize 2 questionnaires to actually reach out to parties, but also to UN resident coordinators and their country teams to seek information on the efforts that have been made or are planned to be made to integrate national reporting needs into cooperation frameworks. The Secretariat has been mandated to translate the questionnaires for parties in French and Spanish, so as to ease the completion of the questionnaire by parties. And we will make these 2 questionnaires available before the Conference of the Parties. And should the COP16 decide accordingly, the review of the information collected would be done under the next work program of the committee. Continuing the activities pertaining to national reporting, the committee was mandated to initiate a dialogue with regional centers and international bodies and organizations that actually have a mandate to support parties with national reporting. The committee has finalized a questionnaire to collect information from those entities on their activities to support parties, and it will review this information in the context of a dialogue with all those entities in this new work program, if decided by the COP16. So this is a broader discussion with regional centers, the executive board of the special program, UNEP, SAICOM, and other entities such as FAO, JEF, UNITAR, UNIDO, the World Bank, and other relevant financial institutions, so that the committee has a better grasp of all those entities out there that can help and are helping parties with national reporting. Finally, there were two activities entrusted to the committee to improve reporting. One was to revise, if needed, the reporting targets, basically to see whether, based on the classification of compliance performance, there was a need for the COP to consider adjusting those targets. The committee decided that it was too early to do this exercise since the classifications are still preliminary. And the other activity was to review whether measures not included under paragraphs 20A and B of the terms of reference of the committee should be proposed for consideration by the COP. This is really the last outcome of any consideration of a specific submission and the kind of measures that the COP could be taking. This was deferred to the next work program subject to COP16 approval. Turning now to a second thematic area of the work of the committee, and there is general review mandates. It's illegal traffic, so helping parties to prevent and combating illegal traffic. The committee was mandated to undertake a scoping exercise, scoping the closed cases of illegal traffic, taking into account primarily the information set out by parties in Table 9 of their national reports. And the scoping exercise was to cover cases closed in 2018 and 2019. You have here the number of such cases that were reported by parties, 914 for 2018 and 1,048 in 2019. So the report considered by the committee was to look at all those cases based on the information transmitted by parties, and to analyze, for example, the waste streams, the direction of the transboundary movements, the outcome in terms of penalties, punishments, or other measures. In terms of data, some of the conclusions reached in this report are that 70% of the 107 and 75% of the 110 parties that transmitted national reports indicated that there were no cases of illegal traffic closed in the reporting year. Half of the parties that reported closed cases of illegal traffic were from the WIOG region. The main waste streams that were subject of illegal traffic were e-wastes and end-of-life vehicles. The committee also decided to recommend to COP16 to revise Table 9 so as to facilitate the transmission by parties of information that is complete and clear. And then on that basis, the committee also recommends that a scoping exercise for the future years, so 2020, 2021, be included in the work program for the next biennium. And of course, the reports have much more information, but I'm just synthesizing the main outcomes here. Again, on illegal traffic, two further areas of work, which are about improving national coordination, so that means between the competent authorities and all the other entities at the national level that are engaged in the enforcement chain, customs, police, prosecutors, port authorities. And another area is how to disseminate guidance on preventing and combating illegal traffic that is adopted by the COP, and how to make sure that it actually reaches the primary clients at the national level, which is the competent authorities and all these enforcement entities. And the committee, and these are two different areas of work, but basically really geared in the same direction. And usually the challenges that are faced by parties in two areas are quite similar. So the committee finalized questionnaires for parties and also for organizations on their activities to support parties in these two areas, so enhanced national coordination and also dissemination of guidance adopted by the COP. The Secretariat is to translate the questionnaire for parties in French and Spanish, and we will make both questionnaires available before the COP16. The information collected would be reviewed by the committee under its new work program, should COP16 decide so. Still under the thematic area of illegal traffic, this is a new activity for the committee, and it's really going in depth, trying to identify key reasons or challenges that the parties may face with actually preventing and combating illegal traffic. And this is to look at the national legislation and how legislation actually embeds the minimum requirements set by the Convention to prevent and combat illegal traffic. These are detailed in the checklist for the legislator, which was adopted by the Conference of the Parties. And parties, through their responses to question 1C of the reporting format, actually do provide information on what they're doing. So, for example, if there's a definition of illegal traffic in their legislation, if there are measures to prevent or punish illegal traffic, and if there is in the legislation or regulatory necessary provisions to ensure that the party can take back waste illegally trafficked, or make sure that the waste illegally trafficked will be disposed of in an environmentally sound manner. The committee considered a report based on the answers by the 110 reporting parties for 2019, and it assessed whether this legislation indeed meets the requirements set in the checklist for the legislator. There's a preliminary report and conclusions that was considered by the committee, but the committee felt that the information, as it was collected and analyzed, should be checked with individual parties to make sure it is accurate. So the Secretariat here again will be reaching out to parties with the draft classification and seek their feedback. And if COP16 agrees, the continuation of the exercise would take place under the next biennium. Finally, two activities were just initiated by the committee, given the short time period. This is a dialogue with regional centers, international organizations, and compliance bodies. Again, looking at lessons learned from other bodies, whether it's MEAs with trade control mechanisms, or regional centers or international organizations providing support to parties to prevent and combat illegal traffic, typically World Customs Organization, Interpol, etc. And the committee will also has also proposed that it defer to its next work program, reviewing cooperative arrangements, including in-force, in terms of reference of in-force. Turning to national legislation, a third thematic area, the committee was mandated to review the outcome of parties' self-review of their legislation implementing the Basel Convention. So under the illegal traffic mandate, the committee really focused on national legislation implementing Article 9, but based on information from parties set out in the national report. Here, it is parties who directly were invited to complete the checklist for the legislator in its entirety, so for all the Basel Convention provisions, and to submit the outcome of their review to the committee. 49 parties took part in this exercise and transmitted their completed checklists. The committee reviewed them and concluded that 30 of those 49 parties have indicated that 100% of the provisions of the Basel Convention are reflected in national legislation or implemented administratively. In terms of outcomes, the COP is invited to consider revising the checklist to add Article 4.1, which is on the ban amendment. This provision entered into force subsequently to the adoption of the checklist, so it's now incomplete. And the committee also invites the COP to request the committee to continue this exercise under the new work program and to extend the review of legislation to the implementation of the ban amendment, the plastic waste amendment, and the e-waste amendments, of course, only for those parties that are bound by either Article 4A or the revision to the annexes. Still under national legislation, the committee was to focus also on how to assist parties that have not developed legislation implementing the convention, or parties that have not indicated whether or not they have legislation implementing the Basel Convention. And these are 23 parties. So the committee reached out to them and invited them to engage with the committee. 3 parties came back to the committee, but 20 did not. And the committee decided to ask the Secretariat, but this time in conjunction with the regional centers relevant for the 20 parties, to go back to the parties and seek further engagement. And this would be done before the COP. And again, further work is proposed to take place under the next work program. And all these activities were also on the docket of the committee, but there was no time for the committee to review them. So the committee is just suggesting that these be included in the next work program. But I'll spare you the reading. You will receive the PowerPoint after. In the interest of time, I'll jump to country contacts. So a new thematic area under Basel Convention for a long time, almost 10 years. There was a 100% score of complete designated country contacts, so whether competent authority or a focal point. And just recently, through a review of this information, the Secretariat noticed that one party, a new party to the convention, hasn't done so. And also, the Secretariat also noted that there are a couple of parties for which the email addresses or the contact details were incomplete. So for this reason, the committee has asked that the Secretariat actually reach out to those parties just in case there is a challenge, a specific challenge with identifying and communicating to the Secretariat those country contacts or adequate contact details, so that parties can actually reach out to them and the Secretariat as well. So the Secretariat is following up also on this. Another activity under the general review mandate was to enhance coordination with the Compliance Committee of the Rotterdam Convention. And this activity, as you can imagine, was jointly mandated to both committees, and the committees considered them individually and jointly. It was a very interesting exercise. So as the previous activity that was a joint issue was a substantive or programmatic issue, if it was about the transmission of information under the conventions and how these obligations are embedded in the broader sustainable development cooperation framework processes. This is more institutional cooperation or coordination between the committee and how they wish to organize this cooperation. This is a mandate that actually goes back to 28 years and 29, so a long time ago at the outset of the synergies process, and the COPs back then had already envisioned that a second compliance committee would soon or one day be established by the COP, either the Stockholm COP or the Rotterdam COP, and so they had already outlined some areas of possible coordination between the committees. So this was now the first time for the two committees to look into this, and they reached each their own conclusions. For the committee of the Basel Convention, the committee welcomed the opportunity provided during its meeting to coordinate with the other committee. It took note that there is joint Secretariat support, which is at the PO program officer level is Ivan and I, servicing both committees, but of course under the joint management of the executive secretaries, Basel Convention for the ICC and for Rotterdam joint management also with Remy and Rolf. The committee requested the Secretariat to transmit the report of its meeting to the other committee, which was done already, and it also agreed on modalities of participation by the chair or members of one committee to the other committee. And further work has been included in the draft work program for the next biennium. Finally, I think the last element of the presentation for the ICC, The committee initiated just consideration of this activity of its work program about how to integrate the general implementation of the convention in those cooperation framework at the national level. So there is a narrow mandate regarding national reporting, but there is also a broader mandate for the committee to develop guidance on how to help parties do it more broadly for all the provisions of the convention. And the committee only decided one element is that the development of this guidance should be undertaken in consultation with the OEWG, so with a broader set of parties. So not only reaching out to individual parties to seek information, but then to actually consult with the OEWG to make sure the product is enriched by contributions by all parties and observers. So this would take place under the next work program. It's so decided by the COP. And then all these outcomes that I have outlined in terms of next work program were integrated in the 2024-2025 draft work program of the committee, which was circulated to all parties on the 26th of November with an invitation to comment by today, 15th of February 2023. So far, comments have been received by the EU and its member states, Guatemala and Yemen. I've provided here the URL of where you can find those comments you'd be interested. And again, today is the deadline to provide any comments. Then the COP will consider this as part of its mandate in May. And finally, just the last piece of information, the ICC has decided that they would like to request a side event during the COP. And the side event would focus on its stream of work aimed at specifically supporting individual parties with the implementation of the convention, not the general review mandate, but the individual support, for example, the 14 submissions I mentioned earlier, but there has been in the past other submissions that were considered and resolved satisfactorily. I think with this, I'm finished with my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. Yvonne, over to you.
Thank you very much, Juliette. And I will now turn to provide you with some information about the first meeting of the Rotterdam Compliance Committee. And you'll have a chance to ask questions about both parts of the presentation after this segment. So the Rotterdam Convention Compliance Committee is a very new body. The annex to the convention that contains these provisions and sets up the Compliance Committee entered into force in 2019. So this was the first opportunity for the committee to meet, and it did so between the 16th and the 18th of November. As Juliette mentioned, there was half a day of joint session on issues of common interest with the Basel Convention ICC. The Rotterdam Convention Committee is made up of 15 members who are elected by the COP, and there is an equitable geographical representation, so members from each of the UN regions. And the members have expertise and specific qualifications in the matter covered by the convention, so looking at international trade in chemicals. There is a chair, a vice chair, and a rapporteur for the committee. The committee was very conscious of the fact that it had to hit the ground running, and to make the best use of its time, they initiated the work electronically and elected these officers by electronic means before their meeting. So we have Mr. Osvaldo Alvarez Perez from Chile as the chair, Mr. Martin Lacroix from Canada as the vice chair, and Ms. Mara Kuraba from Belgium as the rapporteur. The committee has two prongs to its mandate, similar to the mandate of the Basel Committee. It looks at, under the Rotterdam Committee, looks at specific submissions, so individual party implementation and compliance, but also at systemic issues of general compliance, so where there are issues that are being faced by a number of different parties, and where a more systemic, holistic view of things could help all of those who are facing similar or the same problem. And both of those elements of its mandate were looked at during this first meeting. In terms of the specific submissions, there were not any specific submissions at this meeting, which is not really surprising given how new the work of the committee is. The committee within Annex 7 and its terms of reference, if you would like to refer to them as that, has the possibility of looking at self-submissions made by a party about challenges that it is facing, party-to-party submissions, but also in relation to certain obligations under the convention, the committee itself can initiate a submission. The committee at this meeting decided to, and based on the mandate from COP, prioritize the work in relation to specific submissions, so as to assist parties that are facing the most significant challenges, looking at which obligations are most widespread in terms of the difficulties, which are key, and really using the committee as a facilitative tool to support those parties. So trying to provide as much assistance to identify where there are issues and to see what the needs are and how to help. One of the issues that was identified as absolutely key by the committee was the issue of designating a national authority, which is an obligation under Article 4 of the Convention. And the committee noted that there are 5 parties that have not designated a national authority, one of which is also under consideration by the Basel Committee for the same reason of not designating contacts, and so requested the Secretariat within the Rotterdam context to write to those parties to invite them, remind them of their obligation, invite them to designate the authorities as soon as possible, and to inform of any challenges that are being faced in that respect. The committee was also very conscious of any lessons that could be learned from other existing entities, and so asked the Secretariat to study other multilateral environmental agreements to see where there are templates, and then to develop a template that could be used by parties to facilitate transmission of specific submissions. Here it's important to highlight that the committee did not want something that forced parties to use a template that may not necessarily be suitable for them, and so stressed that this was a template to be used by parties where they saw it as helpful and supportive in compiling the information. So it was more of a voluntary tool rather than an obligatory template to use for specific submissions. The Secretariat was also requested to undertake a number of different awareness raising activities and to look at incorporating awareness raising on the committee, its mandate, its activities, its composition, and its purpose, its objectives, within technical assistance activities. So, for example, looking at using the upcoming regional preparatory meetings for the COPs to raise awareness about the committee, also looking at where there could be a session incorporated into other activities, so as to make parties and other stakeholders aware of the committee and what it's doing. So that is ongoing work. And the committee also asked to explore those lessons from other implementation and compliance bodies to inform the committee as it goes forward in its work. The committee did look at this as an initial stage, and so there may be a change of approach as it develops practices and builds up experience in its work. There were a number of different issues that were considered under its second branch of the mandate, looking at systemic issues of general compliance, one of which was the issue of laws, regulations, policies, procedures, and other measures. The committee noted that there have been several encouragements by the COP to parties to submit texts of national legislation, and that 24 parties have so far responded to that call. What the committee recommended was that rather than encourage, the COP request those parties to transmit the texts, and that those that specifically relate to final regulatory actions and import responses were of particular interest. The Secretariat does maintain on the website an online database of those texts, so whatever is received from parties would be made available, and the idea being to, in that sense, raise awareness of the different measures that are in place in each party, and to facilitate compliance with the decisions that are made by parties in terms of international trade of these chemicals. So the recommendation is included in the information that will go to COP, and then to see whether the COP will take up that recommendation. Another area of work related to notifications of final regulatory actions, where there was a decision agreeing on a questionnaire that would look at identifying what issues parties are facing with transmitting these notifications of FRAs, which form part of the bedrock of the convention and its control procedure. On the basis of the responses that are provided by parties, the Secretariat would prepare a report that would be a qualitative and quantitative analysis, so really looking in depth at this issue and coming back to the committee to potentially make recommendations for the COP. Perhaps just to highlight that the deadline for responding to that questionnaire will be the 30th of June. The questionnaire we're anticipating will be out in the next week. So parties will have a few months to be able to coordinate if there's a case of several different entities involved at the national level, and to compile whatever information they may wish to transmit within that questionnaire. We will not only be sending out an email with the questionnaire and access information, but we will also be again, using opportunities such as technical assistance activities or the regional preparatory meetings to raise awareness of the existence of that questionnaire, answer any questions that parties may have as to how, when they respond, and really try and encourage as many parties as possible to provide responses and information to feed into the work of the committee. Exports of chemicals listed in Annex 3 was also another area of the committee's work, where it noted that there was a certain amount of information available in terms of challenges being faced by importing parties with submitting import responses, but this was at present not collected in a systematic or formal manner. Whereas the other element that was included in its work program for this biennium related to looking at the challenges being faced by exporting parties with ensuring that exporters in their jurisdiction comply with these import responses, and there is currently no information about those challenges. So the committee decided to initiate its work where there was some information available, and has included within its draft work program for the biennium 2024-2025. Further work in relation to exporting parties. And so the Secretariat was requested to continue and to collect more specific information in relation to the submission of import responses and to prepare a report, which will then go through to the second meeting of the committee. In terms of information exchange, there was some information put to the Compliance Committee, but there is a proposal that further work continue on information exchange. And there is a request to the Secretariat to prepare a draft compilation of the options, so looking at what are the options for exchanging information and how are they used by parties. And then subject to approval by the COP, further work would continue in the next biennium. So there were two areas of work that were of common interest with the Basel Convention ICC, the first being information submission. And as Juliette said, there was a slightly different focus in a Basel context to a Rotterdam context, but still with significant overlap in terms of the mandates provided by the COPs. Looking at the issue of the United Nations Sustainable Development Cooperation frameworks, and within a Rotterdam context, seeing just how parties, if at all, were incorporating their information needs within those frameworks. In this context, the Rotterdam Convention Compliance Committee noticed that it was at the very early stages of its work, and that further information could be helpful in order to decide and make an informed decision going forwards as to how to tackle such a mandate. So what it has proposed is to continue to monitor developments, to request the Secretariat to organise an explanatory presentation at the second meeting. It did welcome the lessons learned from the ICC in the joint session that they had, and requested more time to determine how to proceed in a Rotterdam context. So the idea would be to come back to this at its second meeting. In terms of enhancing coordination with the ICC, this again was an issue of common interest, and Juliette has summarized very nicely what the issues we're looking at here in terms of the lessons learned from each other, in terms of consistency between the two committees. From a Rotterdam Convention perspective, the committee certainly took note with appreciation of the joint Secretariat support. As Juliette said, we have that at various different levels. And there was an initial approach that was recommended whilst the committee is establishing its work and just initiating, bearing in mind that this is the first biennium where it's really started its work. So in terms of going forwards and continuing this communication and coordination cooperation with the ICC, they did decide on certain actions to take to ensure that each of the committees is informed, and to enhance this cooperation, including from the Rotterdam side as well, having this transmission of the meeting report. And as Juliette highlighted, that has already taken place. There were also elements that were agreed in terms of participation by members and the chairs in each other's meetings, and how that could occur. In terms of the members of the committee, the Rotterdam Convention Compliance Committee saw that there could be some benefit to having members who have experience in other compliance mechanisms. And so within its recommendations to COP11, which will be considered in May, it does encourage parties, or it has recommended that the COP encourage parties to nominate members with such experience, at least for the next 2 cycles of nomination of members, so that this experience and lessons learned from other similar contexts can then also inform the work of the compliance committee as they see appropriate. The draft work program for 2024-2025 has been agreed, and it is contained within the meeting report that is available on the convention website. It builds on the work that was initiated in the current 2022-2023 biennium, and what you will see from the annex to the meeting report, which is document 10, is that the committee has kept the elements that are new in track change to help parties see where there would be potentially new areas of work, or where the areas of work that are proposed are building on what has already been done. So that will also be considered at COP11. Of course, comments on the draft work program are more than welcome, and will also be presented to COP11 and can be discussed in, under the agenda item on compliance. Looking forwards and being conscious that we do have a COP in between the first and the second meetings, the committee entrusted the Secretariat in consultation with the chair to identify both the venue and the dates for the second meeting, taking into account what happens at COP, both in terms of what is agreed as the program of work, as well as the budgetary implications. So on that note, we will close off our side of the presentation with great thanks to all of you for your attention, and certainly take questions as we go forwards now. And I see that we already have some comments in the chat. Please feel free to either raise your hand or to put your question in the chat. And if I may ask Juliette and Dan to help me keep an eye out as well. So maybe, I think, Juliette, the question from Sherif Suleiman Koulibaly would be for you.
Sure, and thank you so much for the question, and I'll read it just in case meeting participants don't have access to it. Sorry. Wanted to read it and clicked it down. Concretely, for questions of support to the parties, what are the ways and orientations proposed by the committee in West Africa? We have difficulties with identification of biodegradable plastic or not. Thanks for the great work. Well, first of all, thanks a lot for the kind words. Maybe I'll answer quickly along 2 prongs. So more generally, what the committee can do, I'll talk about Basel. It is a possibility for a party that is facing possible challenges with the implementation of the convention, that it pertains to itself, to actually come forward and seek the support of the committee. This has happened under Basel with Oman, Central African Republic, and Togo. It was more difficulties either with national reporting or with the development of legislation. But you may, any party that has challenges with any provision of the convention can come forward. And the kind of support that is provided is, first of all, It takes place in consultation with the party, with exchanges, discussion, and a very facilitative and constructive context. And depending on the nature and the type and the cause of the issue at hand, the committee will target its response. And it can be either providing guidance, providing information, or if there is more substantive support that is needed, a recommendation that the party develop a compliance action plan with the deliverables and timelines, the support of international consultants or national consultants, and also some financial support provided to the party subject to its availability through the implementation fund. More specifically regarding the issues of identification of waste and whether the wastes fall within the scope of the convention, which is a more technical issue. You would have, I mean, of course, the party can ask the committee for its support on this specific issue. The committee would probably rely on experts to provide assistance in this respect. If it's a question that's general in terms of you have a type of plastic waste and you're not sure whether it falls under the scope of the convention, you can also directly reach out to the Secretariat through email, and we have a team who can provide some help. If the issue is more about implementation in the field and techniques to train, for example, customs officers or competent authorities or things like that, then we would have to see whether we can provide technical assistance through an activity on the ground. And we have a range of projects going on to support individual countries at the country level with the implementation, for example, of the plastic waste amendment. But this could be another track that a party may wish to explore. I hope that's helpful. If you wish to approach the Secretariat with a question, just reach out either to Yvonne and I, and we will then follow up internally and make sure that you get the information you are seeking. And if it's about technical assistance as well, we will transmit it to our colleagues so they can see what is in the pipeline or what could be planned going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliette. And maybe just before turning over to the hand I see raised, just to really emphasize the fact that we look to the party to tell us what their needs are, and that certainly informs the work of the committees. So the committees are very much listening to the parties as to what the challenges are and what the needs are. And perhaps if I could. I think, Stefan, did we have a question from you? Stefan?
Yes, sorry, I was fighting with my computer. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for the very interesting presentation. I have a tiny question for my understanding. It is mentioned for integration in the for the both committees, and let me just get how it is written. Guidance on how to integrate the implementation of the convention in UN cooperation framework, and it was mentioned sustainable development frameworks. It is a bit broad as a concept, and I wanted to ask if you had specific sustainable development frameworks on your mind already, or it's just broad?
Maybe if I turn over to Juliette, because the ICC is much more advanced in this work.
Yes. So this is for now. The committee has not yet, unpacked the mandate that was provided by the COP. So the COP's mandate is quite broad, and there was an initial conclusion under the last program that there was apparently some challenges with those entities implementing the convention to really embed the needs to implement the convention in this broader cooperation frameworks that are to be developed by each member state, I mean, developing country member states, to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, right? And because you have in the Sustainable Development Goals one indicator which is about the transmission of information under the MEAs, the idea was to see whether using this hook, parties were actually really trying to then make sure that the convention, not only the reporting obligation, which cannot exist in isolation, it's really linked to the actual implementation of the convention. The implementation of the convention was therefore integrated through what mechanisms and how it was happening, whether it was a priority for the different countries, because we know that not achieving all SDGs have to be integrated as a priority at the national level, but if to know which party is actually doing so and using this indicator, specific indicator and target, and if they do so, what are the lessons to actually achieve this or not. The guidance itself would complement the existing guidance, because there is a lot of guidance out there to actually develop the cooperation frameworks, but how Basel fits in there and how to help parties to achieve this objective is was the mandate given by the COP. But the committee has not yet taken a really initiative on that. The first step in the direction are these questionnaires that are going to be sent out in the coming weeks to parties to try to map how many of them actually link implementation of the convention, the specific MEA of the Basel Convention in this broader context. How do they work at the domestic level? For example, is the competent authority of focal point really part of the team? And then from the other side, from the UN side, the UN resident coordinator and the country teams, how much are they aware of the Basel Convention? How much are they in a position to support the country with embedding the implementation of the convention in those cooperation frameworks? So there's 2 tracks of work that are initiated now through these 2 questionnaires, and I guess it will be an evolving maturing exercise that will take place if COP16 decides really under the next work program. I hope that clarifies.
I think we have Stefan very happy, and I see a hand up from Lendita. Welcome, Lendita. Lendita is one of our members on the Rotterdam Convention Compliance Committee. Please.
Thank you, Yvonne, and thank you, Juliette, for... can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you, because I get some problems in the beginning of the meeting. Thank you for very well prepared presentations. Really, I don't know, it is not question, maybe it's a comment, or it was a very pleasure to be part of the committee, and we work all together with other colleagues from other parties and secretariat in order to discuss issues that parties are facing difficulties in implementation of the provision of the convention, and we will see for the work after that. So we will have now a regional preparatory meeting for the COP. Should we discuss the outcomes of the report and to discuss with other parties, because in our region we have parties with economy in transition and developing countries. Can you explain if those issues will be discussed within the regional preparatory meeting? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lendita. And we're already starting the awareness raising activities. So certainly within the regional preparatory meetings, there will be space to cover all of the topics that are coming up for the COPs, and that includes the issue of compliance. So what will happen in all likelihood, I mean, each region has its own specificities, but the Secretary will certainly present the documents and what is before the COPs. Now, what the region decides to do with that in terms of the discussions that it has, quite often the regions do go into the details of that, but from the Secretariat side, we don't dictate what then happens. So it would really be for there may be some issues that within the region you think are straightforward, and so do not necessarily need any further discussion, and so you can go on to issues where there might be slightly more divergence between the views in the region, but it would certainly be good to prepare as much as possible so that those within the region are made aware of what's coming up at the COP, including the different elements that are included on the draft work program for the next biennium, and to see if there are any questions that come up that you could help to answer, or that require more discussion within the region. But it would certainly be for the region to determine how it then takes that introduction and presentation from the Secretariat. And I don't know if Juliette, if you wanted to add anything further to that.
I would thank you, Yvonne, and thank you for the question, Anita. From our side, I mean, I can just support what Yvonne said. We are in the hands of the region. The region decides what kind of topics it wants to focus on during the regional prep meeting, and if it wishes to discuss more the outcomes of the compliance committee, it's in its prerogative, of course. From Basel's side, just to note that the committee has not put forward conclusions or draft decisions that would seem to be particularly challenging for the COP. So we're hoping that at the last COP, there were a few things that were a bit more difficult for some parties, or there was development and adoption of guidance documents, which required more negotiations. But at this juncture, because limited work could be done basically within the 1 year, basically what is coming out of the committee and going to COP reflects a lot what was in the previous decisions. So hopefully there shouldn't be anything contentious, at least on the Basel side. So we're hoping it would be it wouldn't require too much of the attention of the parties, whether during the regional prep meetings or during the COPs themselves. But that's the hope.
Okay, so I think we've answered your question, hopefully, Landita.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, I don't see any further hands or anything in the chat. But again,
yeah, there's a question. Is it still possible to submit a national reporting regarding BC? I don't know if you see one from Ivory Coast. Oh, sorry, it's private. Sorry, so of course you did. Sorry about that. So the answer is yes, you can transmit national reports for the current year, for previous year, the year before. If you don't have login password, just contact us. We'll help you. Actually, Dan, who's supporting the meeting, can help you also directly with that. The Secretariat never closes the doors to the transmission of national reports.
Always more welcome. Okay, I think that was the last of the questions. So unless anybody has any further questions or points that they'd like to raise, I would suggest that we could close off the session for this morning. As mentioned at the start, there will be the presentation made available to all of you by email following up, and that's likely to be this afternoon. So our thanks to our colleagues Dan and Babita for sending that presentation to all of the participants. So maybe with that, certainly from my side, thank you very much for your attention this morning, and the team, whether it's Juliette's side, my side, Rome colleagues, we within the Secretariat as a whole remain available to help support and advance the work of the committees overall. So thank you very much from my side.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to see you in Geneva.
Indeed.
you.
Have a good day.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you and bye.
Thank you, Flores Window.